Hi everyone, and welcome back to Grow Great Live. I'm your host, Ria Lala, and with me are my co-hosts, Mariana Pollack and Antonia Dodge. And today we're talking about porn. Now, if you're lucky and caught our last episode on sex and talking to kids about sex, then you won't want to miss this one. So, Antonia, let's start off with you. What do you think about porn?
Well, there's a distinction that I have between how I feel about porn and how I feel about porn in children. And I think that that's a good distinction to make because the concept of pornography has become more and more acceptable in general, and yet it is still a massively taboo subject. We're more open to talking about it than we used to be. In the past, we would sweep it under the carpet. Only seedy individuals would get involved with that. Those sort of shenanigans. And now we're at a place technologically, because of the internet, because of access to so much content and information globally. If you put in a even mildly suggestive search term, you're going to run into pornographic sites. It's very easy to do. And so we're stuck in the middle. We are coming off of the tail end of a time period where pornography was massively shameful and something that we simply did not talk about, that our parents, our grandparents had no resources to really have a conversation with their children around because it wasn't that big of a deal, to a time period now where we're so oversaturated with the concept that we can't ignore it. So here we are, like we have the technology to get access to the porn, but we don't have the social technology to really know how to talk to our children about it. So it's like we're stuck in between these two worlds. And I think that creates a very uncomfortable dynamic for parents. How do I talk about it? I know they're going to run into it. Do I address it? Do I get really upset? Do I just put my children, protection, safety filters on the absolute highest and hope they never go to a friend's house or they never run into it someplace else? How do I actually address it? And so I think it's a legitimate issue. I think it's a legitimate issue to try to figure out how you deal with something that is a new problem. Now, porn and talking to children is not entirely new. It's just, it wasn't social. You dealt with it completely on your own, totally isolated. And if your kid had a skin mag, under their mattress, then you just dealt with it as a family unit and you didn't talk to anybody else about how you dealt with it. But now it's no longer just a family unit issue. It is now a societal issue. So I think we've run into totally new terrain on this subject.
Yes, I totally agree. The access is really, really available, for them. And just like you said, it could be a mild search, suggestive search, and, it just shows up. And actually, my 8-year-old, a few weeks ago, we were having a conversation about something, actually his brother and him, and I walked into the room just as he said, "Oh, it's like porn," with, I'm not going to be lying. A little alarm went into my head, even though, I like to think that I have a good relationship with the porn, where I don't hate it, don't love it. I think it's perfectly normal and acceptable for people. So I asked him, I said, "So do you know what that is?" And he said, "Yeah, I saw it once. It was a picture of people having sex." And I said, "Do you want to talk about it?" He's like, "Well, I don't know. What is it to talk about?" I said, "You know what? We can talk about it some other time. It's just a way of, how people are taking pictures of themselves and feeling themselves. And we'll just have a conversation some other time." And that was helpful. It was helpful reacting in that way because, as we spoke about in the previous episode, because I was prepared. It didn't caught me off guard. We're like, "Oh!" I was prepared that a question of any kind of sort of sexual and, porn related will come up. So I think, being prepared it's a very, very important thing, given just how easy access is to porn.
I'm sure if he had said, "I want to talk about it," or if he had asked a direct question, or in your situation, Antonia, if your daughter was older and they're watching porn, what would you say? How would you handle it to explain that? Because that's a question that comes up a lot with parents wanting to know, how do I handle it when the actual situation occurs? Mm-hmm. And do I sweep it under the rug or do I confront it? But if I'm going to confront it, what can a parent possibly say? Mm-hmm. What might you say, Antonia? Do you have any ideas?
Well, like you said, my daughter is 2.5, so we haven't entered the terrain of pornography. So I get a little bit of lead time to try to figure out how I'm going to deal with this dialogue. And I have 2 stepsons, but we've decided as a unit, as a blended family, that my husband's going to be the first line of communication with his, with his natural children, and that we're going to let him and his co-parent, their natural mother, handle that topic. But that said, I think the first thing that I've had to really figure out is, what is my personal relationship with porn? Do I feel that it's horrible and terrible and nasty and evil and wrong? Do I have a knee-jerk response to it? Do I, what is my personal feelings about pornography? And when my personal feelings, and I don't necessarily endorse this or believe that everybody should feel this way. This is just my personal relationship with it. So I actually don't have any problem with the category itself. But I've also created a lot of distinctions. It's not, in my mind, porn is porn is porn. There's beautiful pornography, as in it is sexually titillating, but it's also a beautiful love scene. Like, I mean, what does the judge say? Like, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. There have been moments in R-rated movies of sex scenes that have been quite titillating. And so I would say that that's probably pornographic for me. By the same token, there's also pornography that is incredibly exploitative and takes advantage, is very abusive to, say, women. And then there's like child pornography, which I think is completely, obviously, totally, thoroughly unacceptable. So it's not that there's this broad category of porn and I have a relationship with that broad category. I've actually clean sliced it into different compartments. And so because I understand that my relationship with pornography is that I think that there's acceptable porn and unacceptable porn. I think that my relationship with pornography should be one of understanding that it has a place and that people are going to engage with it, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I also understand that there is a point where a relationship can become addictive, and now the person only can get off to porn and can't have a relationship with another human being, which I think is unhealthy. So I've really contextualized the concept of porn. And when I talk to my child about it, I'm going to bring that contextualization into it. I'm going to indicate that, first of all, talking about porn is like talking about food. All right. Like, I don't have the same relationship with candy that I have with nutritious, wholesome meals. So I'm not going to just talk about porn as if it's just one big conglomerate, right? There are different components to food. And I would like to talk about the dangers of just like if I talked about food with my child, I talk about how too much candy is not good for you, that it releases a part of chemicals in your brain that your brain can get highly addicted to. And that if you get over addicted to it, it might feel really good in the moment, but ultimately it's going to be poor for your health in the long run. So the relationship that I want my child to have with pornography is to not necessarily judge it as, unilaterally awful, horrible, that anybody who watches pornography is automatically a bad person and can't get their shit together, can't get their relationship with sex together. I don't want to create shame around it, and I don't want to create a relationship where it's automatically judged as evil. However, there are dangers, all right? There's legitimate dangers. And so being able to clean slice those dangers, I think, is a big part of the porn conversation I'm going to have with my child. It's not necessarily evil, but there are a lot of hidden dangers in there. So let's address the hidden dangers and talk about those.
Really great point. And I want to get your perspective, Mariana. Just one thing with that, I'd also love you to cover, Mariana, is the different, in order to do what Antonia's talking about, that would be for a certain age group, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because if your child's 4 and comes across My Little Pony porn,
right,
that's not something that you're going to be able to discuss, right? The tiny nuances and differences. So
right.
Yeah, if you could also tell me about that, because I'm curious.
Well, at this point, to be honest, it will be much easier to talk about it with a 13-year-old than an 8-year-old, because I haven't figured out that one yet. Simply because we already discussed, the 13-year-old and us, why do people have sex and how they view sex. Because he asked me, he said, I understand the reproduction. He said, but I also understand that people do it not just for the reproduction. So it will be explaining to them that people have sex for different reasons. People view sex differently as well. For some people, it could be a man and a wife, lights turned off, in the bed, we do it, we go to sleep, that's it. For others, it could be, having sex all over the house. For other people, it could be, filming themselves or watching other people do it. So understanding that porn is one of those perspectives is how do people see sex and, what they use it for. So I think with him, it will be, had he asked in that moment when his brother mentioned that, I would have totally gone, that direction. Now with the 8-year-old, he is not there yet that he understands more of it, what's happening, simply because, yes, he understands way more than the other one when he was his age. but he understands it doesn't really understand it to that extent. And another way also is why I have to be really careful how I'm talking to him. And like I said, honestly, I haven't figured it out. So Ria, maybe you can help me on this one. Is that the younger one is very expressive and very honest and very, very open in his conversations. So I already see him going and talking to his friends at school about what he's learning from his, conversations with his brother, and how that could be a potential problem, that can happen, in school with his friends who are nowhere nearly as developed, as understandable as he is, and not even to mention the teachers and, and so on. So that's what I think about it.
Well, you've asked me a very good question. The question being, the worry about when we dispense information to our kids based on where our judgment calls and where we feel they're at, how do you contain that information, or should we contain that information as they go out into the world? Because there are going to be, many children want to share what they know, and that's something different and new and novel, and they're going to want to put it out there in the space. And it really is an interesting conundrum, because we're met up against our own worries about judgments. That's one. Our own worry about, are we pushing somebody else's child's mind into a space that their parents didn't want them to go to, and now we've come in there and kind of pushed them along. Mm-hmm. But the question now becomes, the way I see this is this is not, every parent is going to use their own judgments about when the right time is. But should knowledge that our child possesses, once we feel that it's okay. So for example, I'm just going to give it like a really innocent one. I may tell my kids that there's still a Santa, right? But there'll be other parents who don't believe in telling kids about Santa. Now, that child is going to go to school. I don't have the control to want to keep this facade, whether how long I keep it up or not. I don't have the control. And should I be frustrated that some other parent has made a different decision than me? Because it is their prerogative. Because honestly, catch me on a different day, I want to tell them the truth about Santa, because I don't want to lie to them about it. And I'm in this very mixed mind about it. So the way I get myself through that is I think I am going to embody my child with the best I can in terms of their knowledge base and their awareness. And at that point, I have to be okay with, if that knowledge base happens to go out into the world, mm-hmm. I can't be saying, this is the way it is, but don't tell anybody. This mm-hmm. is what I think, or this is what, we've talked about, but don't mention anything to your friends or your teacher because it's going to offend them. I don't want my child to be shackled with anything when I've given them pure, clean knowledge based on my judgment call. And this is the good thing, and could be the hardship of life, is that our kids go in and interact with other children, and their parents are making judgment calls on what they tell their kids. And I have no right to wrong a parent for not telling them about Santa, the same way they don't have any right to wrong me about that. But here's the deal. We live in a society where everyone's going to have different belief systems. So the bigger picture here is, if I give the kids something, some bit of knowledge or some bit of awareness, we are sending our kids out and saying, you know what, I'm also going to do my work to be okay with that being representative of what we've chosen in this family. Because the minute I start going, only here but not there, say this but not that, that child now is getting very mixed messages and feeling confused and feeling that there's shame around it and there's uncomfortability. And then now it begs the question, well, why? And so the way I mitigate a parent's worry about this is this. If they're worried about them mentioning it at school, I would go to the teacher and say, hey, you know what? My child was asking questions about this. This is what I've relayed to him. And I just want you to have an awareness. And if another parent feels that their child should never know about sex until they're 16 years old, or porn, or whatever it is, that's their prerogative. But guess what? You got to put them in some other school with not around other kids.
That's right.
You got to do something. You're shielding and creating a bubble around their life, but that's not the world I'm living in. So I don't want my child to have shackles, and I don't want other kids' parents to have shackles. So, if my child who has come home and said, but there is no Santa Claus, it's my prerogative about how I want to handle that. And I don't want that their version or my version shouldn't infringe upon them, right? But I'm here creating in real time their experiences and their awareness. And so, yeah, that's what I have to say about that. Antonia?
Yeah, well, and I think especially when it comes to sex, I mean, it's such a touchy subject, obviously, and I mean, I have my own opinion on the concept, basically what you guys are talking about, of the whole, you know, what if my child relays information that I've given to them? I guess maybe. I do think in terms. I think in terms of ecology. I do think in terms that my actions, my behaviors, what I bring into the world are going to ripple out. Like that's just how it works. That's how ecology works. We're all connected in some way. And so the only thing that I can do to mitigate damage is to be in integrity with myself as much as possible. I have to start with being fully in integrity, and I have to start with communicating to my child being fully in integrity. And if something that I do ends up butterfly effect causing harm or perceived causing harm to somebody else, the only way I can mitigate damage, because we're gonna do that. Like something I did 10 years ago may have led to somebody getting hit by a bus, and I never knew that, right? Like I just didn't know that. I didn't know that cutting that person off or being cut off by them or whatever, like allowing that person to merge before me actually had them dying 5 miles down the road, not me. Like we cannot predict that. It is too complicated. So the only way that we can mitigate damage is to be fully in integrity with ourselves. And when it comes to subjects like sex and pornography, I mean, I have my own opinions on what the healthiest piece of information around that is. And that might differ from another parent. And as you mentioned, Ria, it's their responsibility to mold their child and relay information that they believe is in integrity with themselves. That's their responsibility. But if I never want my child to ever hear anything that contradicts what is integrity for me, then I got to keep them home. Like I can't send them out into the world because the world is going to contradict my integrity. It just is. However, I guess from my perspective as a parent, I've taken the perspective that that's actually healthy for my child. It's healthy for my child to get different opinions. We talked about in a previous Grow Great Live that our children are going to hit a moment of independence, right? Like they go through the dependent cycle and they're going to hit a time period where they are going to figure out things that are not the same as us. That's part of growing up. They're going to have values, interests, characteristics that differ from us. That's just going to happen. And if we need them to be replicas of us, if we need them to be little ego clones of us, then we have to greenhouse them. We cannot allow them to venture into the world. If we want them to become their own independent human beings and not just become a clone of us, which they can't actually be, so that would be inauthentic no matter what, then entering the world and getting contradictory opinions is part of how they develop into who they're going to be that's separate from us. That's actually a healthy part of their development as far as I'm concerned.
Critical thinking, right?
That's critical thinking. That's right. And I want my children to be critical thinkers. So when it comes to bringing it back to the subject specifically of porn, I know that, as I'm like, hey, there's good and bad porn, I know instantly there's going to be a bunch of moms going, bullshit, there's no such thing as good porn. Okay, there's no such thing. And that's a completely valid perspective, right? Like to believe that there's no such thing as good porn, that's totally valid. And if you want to have a conversation with your child about, like there's no such thing as good porn, you can't watch porn, it's exploitative of women as an industry, or it overvalues sex as an industry, or whatever your take is, I totally respect that. The conversation isn't so much, as far as I'm concerned, around what we think about porn. I think the conversation is actually how do we talk to our children in a way that represents our integrity, that doesn't include shame? How can we say, look, if you take the hard stance, I actually think that porn is really bad. I think it's exploitative of women. I think it's a horrible industry. I don't want it in my house. You have a total right to that. How do you relay that to your child without saying, and if you ever look at porn, mommy's going to think you're a bad person? Right? Like those are two totally different things. Saying I'm not allowing porn in my house is totally different than, and if I ever catch you, you're dead meat. Right? How do we say, look, and if it happens, if you run into porn, if you end up watching porn, we'll have that conversation at that time. You understand what the rules of the house are, right? And we'll have that conversation. And then when that conversation, if and when that conversation comes up, you catch it and you hit your search history, like, busty co-eds, blah, 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 right? And although there's no child that would say busty co-ed, but that would never be their search term. But if you run into that history and you're like, okay, so I've got one kid and I got porn on my history, and I talked to the other people in the house and it wasn't them, right? And so how do we address that conversation without automatically foisting shame onto the kid, right? It doesn't really matter what your personal opinion of porn is. It matters how you deal with the conversation.
But I disagree with that, because I think that the personal position in and of itself will create a shame. So how do we have a conversation where we're not pushing our personal opinions on our kids, where they instantly realize kids who want to be in alignment with their parent is going to think, well, I don't like porn, I don't think it should be in the house. Even if they're saying that very neutrally, that child is getting that, oh, this is bad and I'm bad if I watch it. So how do we go back even one step further, I would say, where we resist the urge to unfetter and taint the waters with our own personal judgments, and have the child have a clean space by which to come to their conclusions, where we are just guiding and asking questions. And I mean, I don't know, Mariana, what do you think about that?
These are my thoughts. If you don't condone it, if you don't like it, if you don't want it in your household, if you don't want to talk about it, then do due diligence on parental control. Totally, having the sound, view, any kind of proofing computer, any kind of computer in the house, TV, everything, as though it doesn't exist at all. If you catch it on the history that it's happening, and you still don't want to have a conversation, then don't have it. Because in my opinion, it is much better not having a conversation and not addressing it, if you're going to address it with inducing shame, or like they're doing something wrong, or they feel that they don't love that the child feel that you don't like it or you don't love it because of that. So it's not healthy. I personally think it's not healthy not to have a conversation at all. But if you feel like you are unable to have a conversation that comes from a loving, understanding, acceptable place, then it's better not even to have it and just slide it under the carpet and see what happens. I don't think it's a most effective and best way of dealing with it. But I'd rather have somebody not dealing with it at all, or dealing with it in a really bad way.
Yeah. There's a line that I really like, that I've been using a lot, and it's your words. I say it to the kids all the time. Watch your words, because your words become your world. And the words that we're using every day, when we think the kids aren't even listening to us, when we're talking to our husband and our kids are playing Lego in the corner, and they are like, have spider sense, and their antennas are always up and they are always listening. And the words that we use, like, we kind of get surprised when they say a word or they do something, and we think, well, how did they pick up on that? But it's because they're always picking up on things, and they're always learning from us. And so the words that we're putting out into the space, the minute we go, I'm looking at a dress and I go, I don't like it, I can't be upset then when I hear my children saying things like, I don't like it, because they're hearing me say that, right? They're picking up on everything. So I want to, as much as possible, have a space where we go into, so if we walk in and we see the kids watching porn, like some My Little Pony porn or whatever the equivalent is, where we take the role of, again, curious investigator, curious detective, which is something that I've just kind of coined. How do we ask them questions about what's going on? I'm more curious about, what about that? What questions did they have on that? What about that interested them? What do you think is going on? And after we've extracted that, then we can relay it based on their age-appropriate responses to, this is what's taking place. So, some people, and again, that conversation is going to be different for a 13-year-old and what's going to be different for a 5. So that's where you have to use your motherly or, caregiver intuition into what level it is and give it. And again, you don't need to give them the history of porn. You just have to meet the question for at. So just like when a baby, how does a baby get into their belly? Like, how does a baby get there? Could be a conversation about sperm and egg. Doesn't have to be about the actual physical act of sex, right? So it all depends. But I'd be really watchful about the words that we ever use with our kids. at
I
any point in time, like that our personal judgments come out at all. Yeah.
I think there's a distinction though between ground rules for your home versus necessarily bringing shame. I mean, like, okay, so I agree with you. The words we choose to use. If we say, "Hey, I'm not. I don't stand for porn. I don't think that it's right, or it's acceptable in my home. I want you to know that it's not going to be okay here." Yeah, we are telling them our perspective is. I mean, that all of those words we're using are very, they're the definitive, they're final. They're saying that this is the rule in the house. And so the kid is going to pick up our perspective of porn, right? They're going to pick up that we're not okay with it. I agree with that. That said, you still have to, I mean, if somebody it's integrity for them to not watch porn in their house, to not have it in their house, then again, I mean, you might create some shame that they experience around watching porn, but all you can do is be in integrity with you. Now, I say this as somebody who doesn't feel that way about porn, but I recognize that there are a lot of moms out there, a lot of people out there who are just not going to be okay with it. They just aren't. So how do they stay in integrity with themselves, right? And then the moment that they catch their kid, right, and they communicate that it's not okay in this house, there's gonna have to be a distinction for them, even if it's not, in our minds optimal. There's gonna have to be a distinction between the ground rules of the house and the moment of catching them. A distinction of at that moment becoming the curious detective.
So
Totally.
you're absolutely right. How do they stay in integrity and represent in a way that is curious detective? Just understand that when you're staying in integrity, like this is just a fact. If you're going to stay in integrity to what you believe and put it out there, there is a cost to that. Mm-hmm. And the question now becomes, are you prepared to have that cost? Are you prepared to taint your child's mind in a way that might create whatever it creates, shame and judgment and whatever it is, at the cost of your integrity? And I'm saying, I'm putting it out there. Why don't we question that? Why don't we question whether if this feels like something that I need to speak out and say it in this particular way? Because my argument would be there's always a way to say something that can land that both needs. So where can we find that perfect medium of where your needs are met for integrity and their needs are met where you're not tainting the waters?
I agree.
And maybe you have to get really clever. And maybe you have to dig really deep to figure that out and practice it out in the mirror and think about it for hours maybe till you find the right way to say it, and just put it in the parking lot until you're able to do it that way. Because I think what a very dangerous thing for parents to do is to go, okay, this is just what I feel and this is just what I think, and they put it out there and they don't realize that you've just muddied the waters, and it's like, but I'm just being true to myself. And I really feel that's a really slacker way to approach things. Because there's a cost to it. So let's not do it, but just recognize there is a cost.
Absolutely.
And the cost is you are now taking your child down a path that is the path you want them to be on, and not something that is organically creating out of their own ideas, self-directed, internal directed ways of being. So if you're cool with that, cool.
Well, and we've talked about this in previous Grow Great Lives, is that a lot of times we end up outsourcing how we feel about something to begin with. Like, it was not okay in my family, so it's not going to be okay in my family. And even taking the moment of questioning, like you said, like, why are you taking such a hard stance? Even being willing to have that internal dialogue with yourself. Like, like you said, I'm just being true to myself, and so this is just the rule of the family. Being willing to even ask yourself why this is the rule of the family, why you take this hard stance, really thinking through it, already you're now coming from a place of a lot more openness and open-heartedness than you are just like a closed-minded position. And so I think even being willing to ask yourself where you pick this up and why you feel this way. That said, I guess I'm with you. I actually don't feel this way about porn myself, but I've talked to enough people that do, that I recognize that I'm actually in the minority. Like, how I feel about pornography as a female is in the minority, I believe. That's my guess. My guess right now is societally, because we are in that cusp. We're in the cusp of when it was totally unacceptable to now it's abso-freaking-lutely everywhere. And we're stuck in the middle. So there's a lot of clinging to that old mentality, and that's totally understandable because that's where we've come from. And now we're entering a place where we have to have this dialogue, and now what do we do about it? And I think even just being willing to open yourself up to asking how you feel about it. I think for me, my strategy has been to create distinctions. Because to me, catching my kid watching porn is a completely different dialogue than catching my kid watching porn 10 hours a day. right? Like those are two totally different things. Is my kid watching porn and is curious, or is my kid absolutely addicted to porn and cannot in any way have a relationship with another human being, right? Like there are different levels, and approaching it that there are different levels, there's different issues, right? Are they watching like their, you know, their preferred sexual partner in a relatively vanilla form of pornography, or are they watching like bondage where somebody is getting, you know, they're simulating rape, right? That's a totally different conversation in my opinion, right? Like, and so being able to create distinctions, not just lumping it all in one category like porn is evil, but rather going, okay, so you're curious, you want to know what it looks like when people have sex. I get that, right? Versus, okay, so what's going on for you where you want to be watching somebody get victimized, right? Like what's happened? Like what in your life is making it so that somebody else not being a willing partner is the thing that's attracting you? And even in that moment, Ria, I think when you talk about being the curious detective, that's the moment when being a curious detective is really hard. Like that's a moment when that is like, holy crap, my child is watching rape porn. Right? Like
you got to go into your regulation. Mariana,
absolutely.
you get the last word on this, hon.
My last word about it goes back to integrity, because for people who are firmly, and you know, I love integrity obviously for different things. If you're in integrity, you have to ask yourself, am I choosing to stay? Which need am I meeting by choosing to stand in my integrity as opposed to loving my curious child? Because if I choose to stay in my integrity that the porn is not allowed in this house and we're not talking about it, I'm stomping the curiosity of my child who got across to it and they want to, you know, see what's happening and what it is. And B, I'm showing it in a way that having a conversation just about anything with me, it's not always going to be safe and it's not always going to be open. So if I was a person of integrity that is firmly standing on the ground of no porn in this house, am I in that point choosing to stay in integrity for my own satisfaction? Or am I choosing to show love to my curious child no matter what happens? As a guy said once, his son loved baseball and the dad hated the baseball. And the son, during the spring season, he wanted to go and visit every single baseball stadium park, you know, there was. And, you know, the dad said, you know what, I hate baseball, but I love my son. So that's why I took my son on it. So, you know, you might hate porn, but you love your child, bottom line. So talk to the child about it.
Well, folks, you've heard it. Lots to talk about. Very interesting subject indeed. Well, that's all we have time for today. We look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Thanks and have a great night.